Turn in your Bibles, please, to 2 Kings chapter 5. 2 Kings chapter 5. This sermon is entitled Childlike Faith. Second Kings chapter 5, starting in verse 1. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a man with his master in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord, "Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothes. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy." And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure someone of leprosy? Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me." But when Elisha the man of God heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elijah sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman was angry and went away, saying, "Behold, I thought that when he would surely come out to meet me, stand, call upon the name of Yahweh his God, wave his hand over the place, and cure the leprosy. Are not Abba and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and went away in a rage. But his servants came near and said to him, "My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Then he returned to the man of God, and he and all his company, and came and stood before them. And he said, "Behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel, so accept now a present from your servant." But he said, "As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none." He urged him to take it, but he refused. Then Naaman said, "If not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on, when your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any other god but the Lord. And in this matter may the Lord pardon me, when your servant goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon. When I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter." And he said to him, "Go in peace." But when Naaman had gone a short distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, "See, my master has spared this Naaman, this Syrian, in accepting from his hand what he brought. As the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him." So Gehazi followed Naaman. And when Naaman saw someone running after him, he got down from his chariot to meet him and said, "Hey, is all well?" And he said, "All is well. My master has sent me to say, they have just now come to me from the hill country of Ephraim, 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Please give them each a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothes." And Naaman said, "Please accept 2 talents. And he urged him, and he tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of clothing, and laid them on 2 of his servants, and they carried them before Gehazi. And when he came to the hill, he took them from their hand and put them in the house, and sent them into way, and they departed. And he went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said to him, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" And he said, "Your servant went nowhere." But he said to them, "Did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was this a time to accept money and garments olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male and female servants. Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever. So he went out from the presence a leper. This story begins in a very different way than much of the Old Testament. So most of the stories in the Old Testament begin somewhere in the house of Israel. But our story begins all the way in Syria. And in verse 1, we have so much about Naaman. We're told that he's a great man. And throughout the story, we see several examples of how he's a great man. That even his servants feel like they can talk to him, that they call him father, that they're appreciative of him. And we're also told that he's a mighty man of valor. This is the same thing that David later uses to describe some of his followers. This means he's like the SEAL Team 6. He's like one of the generals of the armies of Syria. He has a Congressional Medal of Honor. He's a man who's courageous and powerful, and everything he's done in his military life has been excellence. Everything he can control externally, he's doing great at. But there's a problem that he can't change with his body. And the Bible tells us that he's a leper. Now understand, leprosy is not one type of skin disease, right? All skin diseases and imperfections were summarized by the word leprosy in the Old Testament. So really what it tells us is that he had some type of skin disease and affliction. Now people in that day would be afraid that those kind of illnesses would spread quickly because some of them were very contagious. And so Naaman, although he's this great, successful, important, high-ranking general, is limited in his life where he can go. He's limited in the places he can go. He's limited in the folks he can interact with. So Naaman is this great man, this powerful man who has such limited control over his own circumstances. The Bible tells us that he was complaining about his leprosy one day, and a servant girl in his house spoke to him. Now, what we need to understand is that Syria was so much more powerful than Israel at this point, that militarily they'd overwhelm them. And so from time to time, they'd go on raids into Israel, capture some people, and bring them back. And so what the Bible tells us is that they brought back a little girl. So a little girl in this case is sort of double emphasized in the Hebrew, and it means that it's somebody probably around 10 years or younger is when she was taken to Syria. So that means that this is a child who was old enough to hear the stories of the Lord, to be raised in the church, if you will. All right? So she was young enough to where she still had that childlike faith. Do you remember that childlike faith that you had when you were a child? If you came to faith as a child, it was something that was sort of all-encompassing. My wife and I, Anna, we talked about this week of how when you have that faith of a child, you didn't need to understand all the specifics, right? You didn't have to know everything that was going on. You just knew that God would provide, or you knew that God would take care of it, or you knew that you could trust in the Lord. But as we grow older, we get more complicated, we have more questions, and it becomes more and more difficult for us to have childlike faith. In fact, we can say that the parents of this young girl raised her right. Maybe even the grandparents had an influence on her. All we know is this is a child who had a strong faith. And because Naaman was a good man, someone who listened to people that were weaker, this girl was powerless. She was a servant in his house. But she hears him complaining about his illness, okay? Now you got to understand, Naaman, he's this big guy. He's a powerful guy. He's Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's Sylvester Stallone. But he still listens to this young lady, right? And this powerful man, he's tried everything, okay? He's influential and he has power. That means he's tried everything he can to bring about his healing. He's tried every lotion. He's tried every person he could pay off. He's tried every stream he could wash in. He's tried everything that he can think of to try to get better, and it hasn't worked. And what I think in my sanctified imagination is that Naaman is complaining to his wife, I still can't get this thing off of me. It's bugging me. I'm great except for this one thing. You got anything in your life like that? You know, is there anything you can't control? Is there anything you can't influence? Is there anything you can't get done the way you want it to get done? Well, Naaman understands that. And as he's talking, this little girl from Israel says, "Oh, Naaman, I wish that you could be near the prophet in Samaria because he could heal you." And Naaman goes, "Well, I've tried everything else. It's worth a try. Let me see what happens." So Naaman goes to the king. Remember the king loves him. The king's his best friend, biggest fan, right? So Naaman comes into the king of Syria. King of Syria says, "Hey, Naaman, what's up, buddy?" And he goes, "Hey, I heard that they have somebody who does magic or something out there. I don't really know what it is." He calls on the name of their Lord, Yahweh, and he heals people. Can you give me an introduction? And the king of Syria goes, "Sure." So he writes him this letter. Now, this letter, I don't know if you could tell from the way we read it this morning, but it's pretty threatening, okay? You might have to read between the lines a little bit, but the king of Syria basically says, "I hear you have somebody out here that can heal Naaman. Naaman is my servant. You better find somebody to get the job done or else. And by the way, here's some gold, some silver, and some change of clothes. So you can either be rewarded or punished. It's kind of up to you. King of Israel, I hear you guys have this person that can bring healing. I hope it's not fake." The poor king of Israel, he reads it, and as he reads it, he kind of says to himself, "They're trying to trap me. They're trying to make me have to go to war with them, and we're probably going to lose again." He tells us he tears his clothes, which I think might be a little melodramatic, okay? But really what it's telling us is he's very upset. He's beside himself with anxiety. He's worried about what might happen to his people. He's worried about what might happen to himself. And Elisha hears about this and sends a letter to him and says, "Hey, why did you tear your clothes, man? Why don't you send them to me? Then he'll know there's a prophet in Israel." This all started because of some kid's faith, huh? Okay, bring him down. So Naaman says, okay, and he gets everybody together. He gets all his servants that are with him. They get all that gold. They got all that silver. They got 10 whole changes of clothes. Back then, people didn't have more than one change of clothes, y'all, okay? They really didn't. It was a sign of great wealth to have 10 changes of clothes, okay? And they get them all together. Don't ask me what they did on laundry day. I don't know, okay? Maybe they didn't have it that much. So they go and they take all this stuff and they come to Elisha the prophet. And they're at his house. Now imagine somebody pulls in your driveway and they knock on your door and you send somebody out the side door to go talk to them. The only time you do that is if it's somebody you're really disrespecting, right? Somebody you don't want to talk to. Right? So Naaman is immediately offended. He goes, "Look, I've crossed a whole nation to be here. I've come all the way from Syria, and I might have this skin disease, but look, I'm Naaman." And understand, he has had to humble himself incredibly. He's traveled across a nation to see somebody who worships a God that he doesn't even believe in. He says, "I've already had to humble myself to get here. I've already had to humble myself to be in this place, to be in this position, and you can't even come outside to talk to me? That's enough. I'm out of here." He tells his servants, pack everything up. If he can't even talk to me, we're out of here. So packing everything up. And as they're leaving, his servants talk to him. Because apparently Naaman is a man who listens to the people around him. Part of the reason he's a good leader. And his servants say, "What have you got to lose, Naaman? You're already afflicted with this skin disease. We're already out here with this 10 changes of clothes and all this gold and all this silver. What's it going to cost you?" And the message the prophet sent was simple. Go dunk yourself in the Jordan. And Naaman says, "But our rivers in Syria are way cleaner." It'd be like if somebody told you not to take a shower today, but jump in False River. Jump in False River, that'll clean you right up. You're more likely to come out with an infection jumping in False River than it's going to clear something up, right? And that's what Naaman's thinking. I mean, Israel is in a desert, hilly area, okay? So the water has got lots of sand in it. It's dark water. It's dirty water. It's nasty water, okay? So the child who sent him to the other side of the country, the child who sent him to a different place, he's required to have the same faith that the child had in telling him about this. He's asked to have a childlike faith. And he wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for the faithful people around him. You know, sometimes in our lives as Christians, we need the encouragement of other Christians. We need people around us to help bring us up. And sometimes we're right at the brink of making that great discovery or making that great decision or being in a much better place financially or spiritually or emotionally. And we're right at the bank of the river, and we don't want to put our toes in. We don't know. We're scared. And we need those other people in our lives. For some of you, it's your family members. For some of you, it's your friends here at church. And for some of you, it's people that you've known for years that will come alongside you and be encouraging. But listen, we all need that in our lives. One of the most faithful ways that God has shown His will in my life and answered prayers was through the faithful encouragement of my friends. Okay? So that's what happens here is Naaman's servants tell him, don't give up. So Naaman says, okay. Poor Naaman, he's a military man, he's a fighting man. So he probably had armor on, right? So Naaman has to take his armor off. He has to go in there. You know, he's probably just wearing some boxer shorts or something equivalent. Comes into that water, and he looks at the dirty water, and he says, I don't know if I believe that this is going to help me. And he dunks himself in that water the first time. And he says, this is pointless. He dunks himself in the water the second time. I just don't know about this. He dunks himself in the water that third time. And he says, this is making it worse. It's starting to itch. He dunks himself in the water that fourth time. He still doesn't really believe. He's still uncertain. He's still starting to get angry. He does it that fifth time and that sixth time. And he thinks to himself, this is not going to work. I don't know why I'm doing this. This is crazy. I don't believe in this backwards religion. If their God was real, they would have won that last fight with us anyway. He dunks himself the seventh time and he's healed. And I don't just mean physically, because now he has faith. You know, sometimes God asks us to push our faith beyond what we're comfortable with. In fact, in my relationship with God, if I call it that, in my following God, in my trying to go that way that God leads us in life, 9 times out of 10, if there's something that I'm not sure that I want to do for God, I pray about it, He ends up leading me to do it anyway. And that's what God has done to Naaman. But Naaman is a changed man. And not just physically. As he comes out of the water, it's unbelievable. Everything he's ever tried didn't work. But this finally worked. And he's overjoyed. And as he comes to Elisha's servant, he says, I got to talk to Elisha now because something incredible has happened. Something life-changing has happened. He runs. He says, get Elijah. Hey, man, you got to come out of your house this time. I'm not going anywhere. I don't want to be weird about it, but come on, open the door. This time, Elisha decides to come out. And he says, hey, Naaman, it worked, didn't it? Naaman said, yeah, it worked. Can I pay you for it? And Naaman doesn't understand what happens. Because they start to get in this kind of awkward argument. Have you ever been in that awkward argument with your family where they want to pay you back or pay for something, or a good friend of yours? Hey, you get my lunch this time and I'll get you back next time. No, you won't. I'm just giving you this. But I want to pay you back. Nah, don't worry about it. It happens all the time in my family growing up, especially when I was able to start paying for dinners for my dad. I didn't want my dad to pay me back. I wanted to pay for my dad's dinner. So that's what's going on. Naaman wants to pay for dinner because God has changed him radically, and our money follows our heart, people. Our money follows our heart. If you want to give to agencies or organizations so you can get credit for it on your taxes or in front of your friends, might not be the best reason to do it. But if you just want to do it because it helps people and it's the right thing to do, that's what happens with Naaman. And understand, he really has childlike faith. Do you remember when you first came to faith in Jesus? Do you remember what happened when God radically changed your life? God does this thing where He subtly gets in our lives and He slowly changes our perspective on things. He changes our personality. I'd be so much meaner if God wasn't in my life. I wouldn't trust anybody if God wasn't in my life. I'm just being real with you because people aren't trustworthy. But God is. And so that's what happens. Now he's got this childlike faith and he's excited. He's like somebody who just got saved. He wants to tell them about God and what God has done in his life. And he comes to the person, he comes to Elisha and he says, here, let me pay you for your trouble. And Elisha says, no, I cannot accept payment. And then they have this crazy, weird religious discussion. And Naaman goes, well, look, I'm going to have to still go into the temple with my master. And see, what Naaman's telling Elisha is, look, I still got to do some things at work that now I don't really believe in. Have you ever felt uncomfortable about your faith at work? That's what Naaman's saying. He's saying, look, I got to go into Rimon's temple. And I got to stand there. And the king, he leans on my arm when he sits down and gets up. He must have been a little bit older guy. I don't know. But he says he's going to lean on my arm and we're going to burn sacrifices and do offerings. And Elisha, I don't believe in that anymore because now I believe in Yahweh. Do you think God can forgive me? Will you forgive me for doing this? I'm going to have to do it. Is it okay? And Elisha says, sure, it's fine, man. Don't even worry about it. And then he gets happy again. He's like a new Christian. He's happy again. He says, oh, that's great because I want to take 2 donkey loads of dirt with me. Is that okay? Now, if you're like me, you go, what? What you need donkey loads of dirt for, man? What's wrong with you? Yeah, that's the first thing I do when I have been radically spiritually changed is I go dig some holes in the backyard, right? No, what's going on is Naaman doesn't understand that God is the God everywhere. So back then, they believed in like territorial spirits and that maybe some spirits or gods were more powerful in other places. And he said, God has changed me so radically, so powerfully, so all-encompassing that I need to take some of him with me. And everywhere I go, I am going to worship and sacrifice items on land that is Israel. Because he understood that God's covenant blessings was tied to the land of Israel for the Old Testament. That there was a system set up, and he didn't quite fit in that system because he wasn't Jewish, but he still wanted to pay homage, respect, and worship him. And so Elisha says, sure, take that. He gets it. He gets his 2 donkey loads full of dirt, and he leaves. And the Bible says he got to the top of the first hill he was cresting before a pastor went and messed it up. You see, Elisha was Elijah's servant. He followed him around until he got the mantle to become the prophet of Israel. And this guy's doing the same thing. He's the servant of Elisha. He's set up to be the next prophet of Israel. And he throws it all away because he doesn't think he's making enough money. So what he says is a pretty horrible lie because what he tells Naaman is, and Naaman's a new Christian, all right? Look, if you've ever been hurt by something a pastor has done or said, then you relate to Naaman right now. Because the servant goes, hey, Naaman, Elisha just sent me here, and he asked me if I could get some money for a couple missionaries that just showed up. And we don't need much. We just need a change of clothes and 1 piece of silver. I know you got thousands of them, but we don't need that. And Naaman goes, hey, man, I don't just want you to have 1 piece here. At least take 2. And he loads up the pieces. He loads up a change of clothes, and he sends his servants to carry these for him to the house. And so he thinks he's slick. He gets in there. He has the servants drop the merchandise. He hides them, and he goes to talk to Elisha. And Elisha says to him, hey, where you been? And he goes, oh, nowhere. Isn't it just like a little kid answer? Come on, man, you could have lied better than that. You lied better than that the first time, just a second ago, but you said nowhere. He's already a little bit scared. And Elijah says to him, didn't my heart go and see when Naaman turned around? In other words, I'm not blind. I could see, but also I'm not blind spiritually. I can see. You're different. You're different. You've sinned against God. You've sinned against me. And you've lied and you've taken this in. And this man that was not born in Israel, this man that was not raised in church, this man that wasn't taught right from wrong from the time he was a child, understood what it meant to be touched and healed by God. He celebrated. He wanted to give all this money to the poor. He wanted to pay us back. And you ruined it. Because God wanted us to do this for free. Being a pastor is kind of weird sometimes. Sometimes people don't pay you at all for things. And that's okay. Sometimes we do funerals for people that we've never met before. Sometimes we end up in kind of odd situations, comforting people in hospitals that we've never met before, or visiting with family members that we've never met before. And Elijah does this pastoral work in the desert, and his servant ruined it. And that's why he says, this disease that Naaman had will now fall on you and on your generations that come after you. Because you ruined it. You ruined this special thing that God was doing. So I have one simple question for you this morning. Where do you see yourself in this story? I mean, that's what we have to ask ourselves. Are we like Naaman? Do we have some pain in our lives that we keep hidden? That we try to cover up with our armor and our good deeds and our courage and our work? Are there things about our lives that we are secretive about? Are there sins that you think if anybody in this room knew, they would think less of you right now if they found out what you did? Then you're just like Naaman. All you need is to expose them to the light of day and have the faith like a child, and it'll be changed. And I'm not saying that to guilt trip you. I'm saying that because it's the most obvious application from Naaman's life, right? Some of you need that childlike faith again. Maybe you were raised in church like that little girl. Maybe you had faith when you were a child to believe that God could move mountains, to believe that God could do anything, to believe that nothing is impossible without God. You used to believe that, but now you're not so sure because your life hasn't gone the way you wanted it to. Your life hasn't gone the way you expected it to. Things are not working out the way that you wanted it to, and you blame God. Then you need to ask Him this morning for some childlike faith, y'all. It's that simple. Or maybe you're like Elisha's servant, and you've taken things that don't belong to you. Listen, it might be literal. I don't know your life. I don't know if you've taken something, stolen something, jacked up the price of something when you shouldn't have. I don't know if you've done that, but God knows. Maybe it's spiritual. Maybe you should be serving in a certain way in the church, and you know that God wants you to do it, but you've been holding it back. And now is a good day to lay it at the feet of the cross. And you might hear all this and just ask yourself, Josh, why are you telling me this story right before Christmas? Well, see, in the Old Testament, they had a series of sacrifices. They had a system that was set up. And there were certain rules you had to follow. And listen, no one who ever lived could follow those rules, right? Just like we can't. Don't make your religion about rules because you will fail. And 2,000 years ago, God decided to come see us because He knew that the only way someone was going to be born who could follow those rules and establish a new system was if He sent Himself. And that's why God said, it's time for Emmanuel. It's time for God with us. We've heard of God. We've seen God. He's Yahweh, the God who was and is to come. And that's hard to understand, but it's deep, but it's wonderful. But if He was and He is to come, is He right here with me? And through Jesus, He came. In the story of Naaman, it reminds me of the story of when scientists first invented insulin at the turn of the century, around 1917. There would be whole floors of hospitals dedicated to children that were dying, people that had diabetes. And scientists were first developing insulin. They came into one of these floors. And the account says that as they came to the first floor there, they looked, and everywhere they looked, there were two parents beside a bed. And they said the room was jammed full of as many kids as they could fit, on each floor because they knew they were going to die. And so they began injecting them with insulin. And what they did was they went to the kid that was the sickest, the worst, the kid who had been in a coma the longest, and they injected him with insulin. And he wasn't healed right away. He didn't get up right away. He didn't move. So they went to the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. And eventually, they gave shots to every person on that floor. And just as they were finishing that last shot and thought they had killed all these kids, the first one started moving and sat back up. And they said the joy and the excitement and the hope that filled that room, that these people who thought they were on death's door and were losing their children, they could get up and now live the rest of their lives. Listen, that's how Naaman felt as God cleansed him by that river. And listen, that's how we feel when God cleanses us of our sins. As our musicians come forward, I just want to ask you, do you know him? Have you experienced that cleansing power of forgiveness of following Jesus? I'm not going to give you a bunch of rules to follow. I'm not going to tell you that you got to give a bunch of money to church. Hey, this is a good sermon to preach if you don't want to feel that pressure. Listen, if you don't have God in your life, you need him. Jesus is the only one that was born to live a perfect life. And listen, a life with him is better than a life without him. He sustains you. He encourages you. He leads you on a path in life. There are many things you can do with your life. There are many ways that people choose to live their lives, but so many of them are self-focused. And you have to ask yourself, when you get to the end of your life, do you want to be someone who spent most of their time, talent, and energy focusing on themselves? Or through Jesus, loving others and helping others and being transformed?